Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Bass Chaplain Fishing Podcast, where faith and fishing hook up. It is high noon on Friday. We are so delighted that you've chosen to join us here today. We have got a super podcast. I want to do a little quick recap of where I've been and what I've been doing. I've been preaching in a lot of places, doing a lot of speaking engagements. Looking forward to a great end of summer and the first of fall this year coming up. Over at Lake Wheeler, we had an exciting event happen. My good buddy Dan O'Sullivan got baptized there, and I got a chance to baptize him, and it was just such an awesome event. We had a good number of the pros come in to watch him be baptized, and a lot of the bass staff, and we did it right there at the boat ramp, and it was really cool. And I wanted to show you something that Dan gave me. Dan O'Sullivan gave me some coasters. He got these done for me. The Bass, look at that, Bass Chaplain coasters. Isn't that cool? He also gave me like this giant barrel top with the Bass Chaplain logo on it, and they are awesome. We might start selling those things. Those things are sharp, man. I tell you, they really are. Got my coaster here for my coffee down here today. You know, in the sport of bass fishing, we have a lot of podcasts. We have a lot of people that are that have jumped in because this sport is growing exponentially. It's an amazing thing to watch these days. My podcast has traditionally been, and I meet up with the sport of bass fishing. I love it. Like nobody is, I can ever tell you. All of my heroes growing up bass pros. I love the sport of bass fishing. But what this podcast is really about is about fishing for men. Now, there are a lot of podcasts out there that, boy, they take it seriously. They really do. They take the sport of bass fishing seriously, like it's going to last forever, and like it's going to be, at the end of time, it's going to mean everything in the world. But I got to be honest with you, it's not. It's really not. The only thing that's really going to matter is what we do with our relationship with Jesus Christ. And so, with that, I want to share with you, there are some people in this life that are, they're born to be pastors. They pastor a church. There's some people that are born to be youth pastors. Some people are teachers. Some people are prophets. So there's all kinds of different ministries out there. But the minister that I'm going to have on today, he loves to fish. But let me tell you something. This guy is one of the greatest fishers of men I have ever met in my life. And now let me share with you this verse of scripture. So this is what this guy is. It says, and he gave, this is in Ephesians chapter 4. It says, and he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ. Today, I have as my guest one of the greatest evangelists I've ever met. His name is Adrian Despres. Now listen, if you've never heard Adrian preach, you probably want to get off this podcast today and go to Google and type in Adrian Despres and listen to this guy. It's my personal opinion. He is one of the most anointed people on our planet today, and he's going to be my guest. He's been the former chaplain for the South Carolina Gamecocks football team, served under Lou Holtz and a guy named Steve Spurrier. But let me tell you, this guy preaches literally all over the country, all over the world, to hundreds of thousands of people, and has seen so many people come to Christ. It is absolutely amazing. My guest today is the man himself, Adrian Despres, one of the greatest fishers of men you'll ever hear. Coming up next on the Bass Chaplain Fishing Podcast, where faith and fishing hook up. To the Bass Chaplain Fishing Podcast, where faith and fishing hook up. And I have the man with me today. This guy has been my unofficial mentor. Try to hang out with him, try to listen to everything that he's ever said in my life. Probably one of the biggest influences on my evangelism that I've ever had. Welcome, Adrian Despres. We are so excited that you're here on the Bass Chaplain Fishing Podcast, bro.
Oh my gracious, what a treat to get to hook up with Chris Wells. What a gift from God. I don't know what happened. See, to me, John the Baptist and I have a lot in common. He was unworthy to untie Jesus' sandals, and I'm unworthy to untie Chris Wells' sandals. So I can't even believe I'm on the same podcast. I don't even know what a podcast is, but I like the word cast in there for fishing. So I'm glad it's called a podcast.
I don't even know where to start, but you are not. Now, normally what I have on this show is I have a lot of guys that are professional fishermen, but you're a professional fisherman in the sense of the word that really matters. You know, God said that He given us some to be, apostles, some to be pastors, some to be teachers, and some to be evangelists, man. And I'll tell you this right here. When I first started, you were one of the first guys that I called when I felt like, okay, I'm gonna step out of student ministry and become an itinerant evangelist. And I put that on a business card, itinerant evangelist, and people kept asking me, "What's an internet evangelist, man? What's internet evangelist?" Nobody knew what it meant. So, tell us a little bit about being an itinerant evangelist. What does that mean? Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a great question. I am an itinerant evangelist. I travel around the world. I've been in 39 countries and 49 states. Right before COVID hit, I was scheduled to speak at an event for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes in Hawaii, the only state I haven't been to yet. And because COVID, right when COVID hit, I was scheduled for it, and it closed down. So I haven't been to Hawaii yet, but I'm willing to suffer for Jesus in Hawaii.
Me,
I'll do it. I'll suffer for the Lord there.
I've actually preached in Hawaii. I hadn't gotten Alaska in, and I hadn't gotten Montana in, but I'd like to, to get to those, one of those days. But hey, listen now, I don't. I need you. You are not a professional fisherman, but you do love to fish. And
Yes, sir.
tell me a little bit
I
about fishing,
I
hunting.
caught a 750-pound blue marlin, and it was a touch the leader, and the guy who's a professional fisherman has won millions on his boat on the Salvation. His name of his boat's called the Salvation off the Outer Banks. We went out there and we were fishing for mahi mahi on 50-pound test, and we were hooking up with 10 on at a time. It was my turn. It was my next line. I grabbed the reel. All of a sudden, the thing almost spools me, and the boat screams marlin. So I wrestled it for 6.5 hours, and when that thing came out of the water, it looked like two offensive linemen, about 100 yards on the water on its one fin, and it was a man. That was a what a fight. I also caught last year a 72-inch, 68-pound, just about 8 pounds shy of the world record mahi mahi. I fished in Alaska for got my limit in Alaska multiple times for all different type of sockeye or any kind of salmon, halibut. I like saying it because it almost sounds like a person, but I ain't gonna curse, but I'm just gonna do that for the halibut. So I caught a 79-pound halibut in Alaska. Caught my share of all the different salmon and whatnot. Fished alongside of two giant bears, so all the fish were streaming into me. And the first time I ever fly fished in my life, I had a fish on every cast for 8 straight hours. I love to fish, but I also love fishing for men and fishing for men and women evangelistically. But I do love to fish. I love to drop a line in the water. My mouth is watering just talking about it.
Man, listen, who was the guy that you went out on the boat with? I think I know this guy. So
Tom
the
Harrison.
Salvation.
Oh, the Salvation is my stars. I just went blank.
I know.
Uh,
I'm blanking too.
uh, it'll come to me in about 14 and a half seconds.
It will. It will. Hey, listen.
A boomer, so you gotta give me some
I
grace. You
think
gotta give me some grace.
I know exactly what you're saying. I think I've actually been out on that boat.
Jamin.
Yeah.
Jamin Simmons. Jamin.
Let me tell you, that dude is awesome. Let me tell you what he did. When we started we were going to do a boat giveaway to raise money for Well Spoken Ministries, and I was very, very tentative. I mean, I prayed about it for 5 years before we did it. And he asked me. He said, "Man, what's your holdup? With doing that?" And I said, "Well, we got to pay for the boat, and that's the first thing." He said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. He said, if you don't sell enough tickets to pay for that boat, I'll buy that boat." And he never had to buy a ticket because it went from there. So he's an awesome dude, man. He really is.
Wow.
It was really pretty
He's a
cool.
great friend of mine.
Yeah.
We've been fishing together quite a bit, so I love that guy.
So you were standing up against the bears there fishing, but Adrian, you're not exactly my size. You're not 5'8" like I am. Tell everybody how tall you are.
I'm 6'6", and I weigh 200 and shut your face pounds. And I played football in college. I went to Furman University, played defensive end. I love doing that. I was also the chaplain for the University of South Carolina's football team for Lou Holtz and Steve Spurrier. So being a big guy on the field and preaching to these athletes kind of served me well because, I mean, even little guys, when they talk about Jesus, demand respect. But it was kind of fun for me to be tall and, shake them, shake their hands and look them in the eye. After I led a guy named Jadavian Klein to Christ. He picked me up in the locker room and shook me like a leaf, and I weighed about 280 pounds at the time, and he just shook me like I was nothing. Uh,
Man, you talk about a man. That dude is a man. There's no doubt. Well, let's get back. All right. So you were a Furman football player. Take me back. We want to hear the Adrian Despres testimony. I want to hear it from high school to Jesus to on. Go ready, set, go. Tell us how you
all
came.
right,
Yeah.
here we go. I grew up I was born in West Virginia, grew up in Ohio. My father was transferred right before my senior year in high school down to Wilmington, North Carolina for my senior year in high school. So I left all my friends, went off the deep end doing drinking and doing drugs and fighting in bars, just a real idiot. And I I get to college, I got a scholarship to play football in college. The first day of two days, the first 3 weeks before school starts, I go out dancing. Now I'm not ashamed to say this, but I used to break dance as a hobby. So if you can imagine me break
Wow.
dancing, I would dance and things would break. No, just kidding. But I get back in the middle of the night about 2:30 in the morning, 3 weeks before school starts, and I walk into my room after being at a bar, got drunk, and was dancing. And my roommate jumps up and gives me this huge hug. His name is Mark Cagle. He's coached football all over the state of South Carolina. So he comes and gives me a huge hug and screams at me, "Roommate, how's it going?" And I'm sitting there. I'm trying to get him off me, but he's an all-state linebacker from Tennessee, so I can't move him. Finally lets me go. I jump up into bed. I'm on the top bunk at Furman University in 1983, before dirt was invented. Appreciate you bringing that up. So he's sitting there, and he goes back to his desk and starts reading something at 2:30 in the morning. So I'm going to pick on him. Hey man, what you reading there, buddy? And he looks at me with this big smile and he says, "I'm reading the Bible." And I don't know if you've ever been around a religious person. You know what I'm saying? When people find out I'm an evangelist, they kind of, oh, I'm a holy person too. And I start acting a little bit funny and whatnot. But this guy, I mean, I was scared to death. I thought he was going to throw snakes at me. Thought he was going to ask me to drink some poison here. It's not going to hurt you. I mean, I was terrified. And I'm laying there in bed, and for the first time in my life, Chris, I don't know how to explain it. I've got the degrees and whatnot in seminary and MDiv and stuff like that. I've read the Bible through 40. I guess I'm on my 40th time this year. 40th time of reading it through, cover to cover. I've memorized a lot of the books of the Bible. I'm not very smart. Football. Okay, so I'm just saying, uh, 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 this one moment in time changed everything. I look at my roommate. He says he's reading the Bible, and for the first time ever, I realized my sins hurt God.
Mm.
Now that actually crushed me. I saw myself the week before lying to my mom about smoking marijuana. She
Mm.
said, "You don't smoke dope, do you, son?" I said, "No, mom, I'm not stupid. There's a reason why they call it dope, you know." And I was high from smoking that night. And I lied right to my mom's face. And that next week, when I was sitting in bed, I would start weeping because I saw me crushing the heart of my mom. And at the same time, now I'm from America, America. Of course, I'm a Christian, well, whatever that means. I was raised in a CME church. I was a CME Catholic, Christmas, Mother's Day, and Easter. Appreciate that. So I'm, you know, I went every once. I had a deep, deep respect for Jesus, if you know what I'm saying. A, a tremendous respect, but for the first time ever, I saw my sins crushing his heart. And that night, as I was weeping, I started confessing my sins and confessed 31 sins that night. I remember because I wrote them down the next morning because I wanted to make sure was doing it right. I didn't know if I was doing it right or not. Then I saw this truck coming. This is going to sound a little cheesy. Sorry, I'm not a mystical guy. Just relax. I'm working here. But I saw this truck in my mind coming down the street like a little vision of it, in my mind. And I saw a person out in front of the truck about to get hit. So I ran up to the guy, threw him out of the way, and I got run over by the truck myself. To this day, I have no idea what that meant other than just saying, "I'm sorry about all my sins, and I give you my life, Lord, even if it means me dying." So I know that moment right there is when I got saved. So what happens is the next morning, my roommate had to get up early. Mark had to get up early to go do some running, and I got up early because I couldn't sleep at night. So I took his Bible. He had a good old King James version. Listen, so I didn't understand half the words. Didn't care. I read the book of Matthew 28 chapters before practice. By the end of the week, I read the whole New Testament. Couldn't put the book down. A month later, I was asked to speak at the Fellowship of Christian Athletes at Furman University. We had one of the largest FCAs in the nation at the time, about 400 or 500 college students from Furman coming to FCA, and it was on fire for the Lord. One of the guys, Kent Williams, my defensive lineman, senior guy, took me under his wing. He said, "Do you want to share your testimony? You want to do a timeout at FCA?" I said, "What's a timeout?" He said, "It's when you share a testimony." I said, "What's a testimony?" He said, "It's when you tell about how you got saved." I said, "Yeah, I got saved last week." I think that's what it was. I don't know what happened. But my whole life's changed. I had led up to this point 50 people to Christ just out of nowhere, just started telling people about Jesus. I walk up to a stop sign and say, "Excuse me, sir, would you like to hear about Jesus?" "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you had a big head." I mean, I went ballistic telling as many people as I could. It was weird for me. Well, I guess I'm like that anyways. But I said, "Well, how much time do I get for this testimony thing?" Listen, Chris, I've told very few people what I'm getting ready to tell you. He said, "You get 5 to 7 minutes." I said, "Can I have 30?" I had never spoken before ever in my life, ever. I said, "Can I have 30?" I have no idea where that came from. He said, "You want to be the speaker?" I said, "What's a speaker?" He said, "The speaker's the person." He said, "Why don't you be our first speaker?" Sure. I'd get up to FCA. Now I just got saved a month before this time. I preached the gospel there. I have no idea what I'm doing. I remember it was Philippians 3, 7 and 8, 4, 5. Philippians 4, 5, and 6. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I said rejoice. Be not anxious about anything. That was a sermon. I don't know what I said, but that was a sermon. And when I got done, every eye in the room was teared up and people were weeping. And I don't know what happened. It's just like I felt the presence of God kind of calling me right then to preach his word. So I started studying the Bible to get myself ready from that point on. So I'm still
Wow.
studying.
Man, Kent Williams is really funny because Kent and I talk probably at least every other week. And we went to Southwestern together, and he's been a huge impact in my life. Well, tell me, let's go from there. All right. So you come to know Christ, you figure out you've got God's calling on your life. Let's talk a little bit about, there's one specific message I want to talk about, because let me tell you, every time I preach, I always reference Adrian Despres. And I always say this, listen, I'm up here speaking today, but the most powerful speaker I've ever heard in my life, and the most anointed speaker, is Adrian Despres. If you haven't looked up the Four Chairs message, you need to go and look it up. And I even did it in the intro here today for the podcast. Tell us about how the Four Chairs came forward. Because I remember the first time I heard the Four Chairs message, I was at Carowinds, and you had these big old glasses on, man, and you were like, you were up there and you were taking, and I remember just the whole place just being fractaled. I mean, it was like everybody in the whole place knew exactly what chair they were sitting in the place. How did that come about?
Yeah, well, it was while I was in seminary, a guy named Bruce Wilkinson. I don't know if you remember that name, Walk Through the Bible, Prayer Jabez, wrote, sold millions of those books. Bruce Wilkinson came to Columbia International University to speak in chapel, and he did a whole week-long event. And I was, enamored with it and had a great time. Then he did a message called The Three Chairs. Okay, I'm working here, so just let me go ahead and say it. He did three chairs, and I'm sitting there the whole time in the back of the auditorium thinking, there needs to be another chair. And so I went up to him, I had a meeting with him. And said, you mind if I borrow your message, but I'm going to add a chair? He said, well, what chair are you going to add? And I explained the first chair is someone who loves God. He had the first chair, the second chair, and the fourth chair in his message. Right. He didn't have what I call the third chair. The first chair is someone who loves God. They're not perfect, but they're getting better. The second chair, they're a Christian, but they've kind of gotten used to God. They've left their first love of Revelation chapter 2 to 4. It's just, Jesus says, I'm going to spew you out of my mouth, Revelation 3. So that's the Christian who's gotten used to God. Then chair 3 is my calling in the ministry. It's the person who thinks that they're saved, but they're not, and they don't know it. It is the most dangerous seat, I think, out of all the four chairs. It's the passage in Matthew chapter 7 where Jesus says, take the narrow road, because broad is the road that leads to destruction and many are on it. that passage of the broad road, it talks about that later on in verse 21, that many will say, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? In your name cast out demons to do many miracles. And Jesus turned to them and said, depart from me, you workers of iniquity, you workers of sin, for I never knew you. They've never had a personal relationship with Christ. That's the third chair. Third chair is someone who's in church, has prayed to receive Christ, but it wasn't real.
Right.
Been baptized, confirmed, Christian, whatever denomination. The fourth chair is someone who's clearly lost. So I've preached that message since then. Well, what Bruce Wilkinson said, he said, I kind of disagree a little bit with you theologically about that. I said, I know, that's why I'm asking permission, because there's a big war in the dispensational group of people. There's one group is following MacArthur, one group is following Ryrie, and there's this big war. And Bruce Wilkinson wrote the foreword for Ryrie's book, and I was on MacArthur's side. And so there's a big war going on there. And I mean, I love both sides, but there's a war. So he said, here's what I want you to do. Now, listen, Chris, this set me free. He said, here's what I want you to do. Go ahead and rewrite the message, use all four chairs, but whenever you're preaching it, don't ever say you got it from me.
Wow.
I said, thank you, because I don't have a brain. I mean, I got a 15 on the ACT. I got a 770 on the SAT. I mean, the lights are on, but nobody's home at my house. I'm a couple bricks short of a load. So I can't remember it. I can't remember to give him credit. So when he set me free at the beginning, I've been preaching it now for so many years. It's a message. If I could say this, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on a podcast or not, but
Yeah.
I'm just going to say I've had wars with God, because I don't want to be known as a one message guy necessarily. It's prideful of me. I know. Don't judge me too hard. But I've had this little war in my heart. Lord, I've got 48 messages memorized. I write messages every week for a Bible study I'm in with about 40 businessmen. And I'm doing I'm writing messages all the time. But I felt like the Spirit of God spoke to my heart. Now, I'm not going to write it down and add it to Scripture. So it's not that kind of message to my heart. But I felt like He spoke to my heart and said, enough. I don't want to hear another word about it. That message is not yours, it's mine.
Yeah.
And as soon as 360 million people in the country have heard it, then I'll let you go to another message. In the meantime, not another word. And I felt the rebuke of God on my soul. And I've never complained about preaching that message since. It seems like everywhere I go, people want that message. I was sitting in Promise Keepers, and it was 17,000 men there in Promise Keepers. I got to be careful saying it. It's one of the last Promise Keepers events. I had the privilege of being the speaker at it. And I gave the invitation to the people who had the binoculars, were looking over the crowd to count the invitation. They said there was a 30% salvation part of the invitation and 65% rededication. It was total 95% decision. There was a guy who came up to me who's been a 12-time MMA champion, MMA champion, huge. I forget his name. Whatever. He came up to me, and he was a real famous guy. Says, that changed my life. Can I sell shirts for you at your table? And there's about a quarter-mile line coming out of my table. And I said, yeah, go ahead. I didn't know who he was. Every other man said, you know who that guy is? You know who that guy is? You know who that guy is? He put it on his blog, and he told me the four chairs he put on his blog. He had 40,000 people pray to receive Christ from reading his blog.
Wow.
From that message. So I don't know. The Lord is, for some reason, He's all over that message. Everybody's in there somewhere. And I agree. If you haven't heard it, you can get online, just Google my name, Adrian Despres.
Absolutely. I'll link it up. I'm going to link it up on my podcast. You guys can check that out. Let me ask you this. Okay. Personal evangelism. One of the things that I've found, I'm actually writing a book right now. My book's called The Three Things, but in the three things I talk about, sharing your faith. And Philemon says, I pray that you may be active in sharing your faith so that we'll have a complete understanding of all the good things we have in Christ. And I think that a lot of people, at least a lot of people, I'm very weary to say, when these guys get on Instagram and stuff and they go, most Christians, well, I haven't talked to most Christians. I don't know hardly, near most Christians, but they say that a lot. But I've run into a lot of guys who, they go to church, they love God, but they have trouble sharing their faith. They have trouble doing that. Why do you think that is? And what would you say to somebody who's struggling to simply tell their story, to tell what God has done in their life? What do you do to to help people along with that.
Yeah, that's I one of my most favorite things to do. I'm doing it again this fall. I'm going to do a Q&A time. I'm going to do a 2-hour message on answers to tough questions. I love doing apologetics. I've written several books on apologetic stuff, and I love apologetics. So for the first 2 hours of the seminar, I'm going to do a 2-hour session on how to answer tough questions. The second 2 hours, I teach 5 different techniques on how to share your faith. Um, but the biggest reason why I think people hesitate to share their faith, or the 2 biggest ones, are fear and care. And what I mean by that is people are afraid of what people think about them when they share their faith. It's more of a prideful fear that says, "Well, I don't want to look like an idiot. I don't want to. I want to do this. I want." They get locked up with what they're supposed to say. So that's why I do a seminar on how to do that. But I think they've misinterpreted the whole purpose of fear. To me, fear is a barrier. Paul came to the Corinthian church with much fear and trembling, and in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. He says in our chapter 2, verse 1. It says in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 19 and 20, pray for me that I would share the gospel fearlessly, Paul says. The next verse, pray for me that I would share the gospel fearlessly as I should. Why did he say it twice? Well, because he's afraid. The Greek word there for fear is phobos, which is where we get the word phobia, like arachnophobia. It's a real thing. It's fear. See, fear to me, though, is my number one ally. And no one, the hunting and fishing, the sports, things like this. This is why I love to preach this stuff there, because we look at fear as our enemy. Fear is never the enemy. If there is no fear, then there is no chance to be bold. The only chance we have of being bold is if there's fear present. No fear. If there's a movement that people try to share the gospel without fear. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? You share the gospel through fear. And that's the whole purpose of dealing with this. It's what I call passion for Christ. I had a conversation with a guy named Louis Giglio. We met at the midfield of Auburn game. Chet Williams, the chaplain for Auburn, says, Louis wants to meet you. I said, you're lying to me. Louis doesn't want to meet me. I'm not nobody. Come on. Okay, so Louis comes up to me and says, Adrian, I've heard so many good things about you. I said, okay, Louis, just stop lying. You go to the hot spot for lying. You know what I'm saying? So we were laughing and having a good time at the midfield. And I said to him, Louis, your definition of passion's all wrong. Now he's the director of this multi-million, maybe billion-dollar industry of passion industry. He's the leader of it. And I said to him, I had the audacity to say, your definition of passion is all wrong. See, his definition, he said, okay, after we settled down, he said, tell me where it's wrong. I said, your definition of passion is the amount of suffering you would endure to achieve a goal. The word passion comes from the Latin word patria, which literally means to suffer. So his is the amount of suffering you would endure to achieve a goal. If you love to hunt, you don't care that the mosquitoes are eating you. You love to hunt. It's painful and suffering, but you call it entertainment. That's what his definition of passion is: the amount of suffering you would endure. In Scripture, Paul says, "I'm going to delight in weaknesses and insults and persecution and trouble. For when I'm weak, that's when I'm strong." So I said, "There's one word wrong in your definition." I said, "It's not the amount of suffering you would endure, but rather the amount of suffering you would delight in to achieve a goal." And he looked at me and he started crying in front of me. And he said, you've just changed the definition of the passion industry. So passion makes suffering look like entertainment. That's what keeps us from not caring. Not caring. See, care and fear work so, like people say, well, I'm not going to share the gospel because I really don't care. But you really don't mean that necessarily. It's more fear working against you, so you don't want to fight. Well, are we not men? And for the women, are we not woe men? That's what Adam said when he woke up. Woe men in the Hebrew Greek lexicon dispensationalists. And so I'm just saying that the secret to sharing your faith is passion. I want to lead every person. I was on a flight last week, sat next to a guy. He starts to weep in the conversation, prays to receive Christ. He's a multimillionaire. Asked me if I would be a spiritual coach. And so I've been coaching him up the last couple of weeks. He's talking about how he's growing in Christ and reading his Bible and doing so that. And I'm getting him in a church. I think he lives in Texas. I know he lives in Texas. So I'm just saying, I don't want to just be an evangelist on the stage. I want to lead as many people to Christ individually as every person I come across is set there by God on purpose. You can't tell God a joke. Hey, Lord, have you heard the one? Yes. I mean, he knows everything. You can't throw a surprise party for him. Surprise, I knew you were going to do that. So I'm just saying, if God, if interruptions are the ministry, then every person I come in contact with today, tomorrow, the next week is a potential someone who needs to hear about Jesus. So
Yeah.
I've memorized 17 different techniques on how to share my faith, and it's different for every person. I just have a little melting pot of all these different techniques, and I've written two that are my very own techniques. Um, so the key is learning as much as you can and being a man or woman of passion. So that's the secret.
That's awesome. Let me take this. Let me ask you a little bit more. So, if there's a guy out there and he's listening and he's been sharing his faith, and a lot of times I think guys think if somebody doesn't pray to receive Christ, they've failed. Okay, talk on that. For a
Yeah,
second.
yeah. I think I don't want to use. I think that may be the greatest misconception ever today. Every time you share your faith with anyone, you have all of the authority of heaven behind you, all of it. And you know what? It is a tremendous success spiritually. It's not our job to save anybody, ever. I have never saved anyone. Only God can save people. So my job is to broadcast a seed. People look at the parable of the soils and we see the four soils and we fixate on them. What about the guy throwing the seed out? That's who I want to be. I want to be the person who's going to throw the seed out. So that's my job. And another way I like to look at it is I want to be the donkey that brought Jesus into Jerusalem.
Hmm.
Nobody said Hosanna to the donkey in the highest, but I want to be strong enough that if I step over a rock, I'm not bouncing Jesus all over the place and people go, "What's wrong with that stupid donkey?" I want to be strong, know the word, handle the word. I was preaching one time, and it was a street preaching thing, and it was crazy. It was down in 5 Points in Columbia, and this guy came up to me and said, "I would rather reign in hell than serve in heaven." I looked at him and said, "That's awesome." I don't ever get flustered when people come up and ask me tough questions. I said, "That's awesome, man. I believe in hell too." And he looked at me like, "Huh?" I said, Jesus describes hell 12 times. He describes heaven once. And I started describing hell to him, and it got kind of hot, if you know what I'm saying. Around, a bunch of people were coming in there when I was talking to them, and I was using humor, but I was really hitting it hard about how bad hell is. And I said, "Well, you tell God." I looked at my wife. I said, "You tell God at 10:15 you had a chance,
Hmm.
but you chose not to. That you're going to go to hell. Okay, you tell God that you had a chance." I walked away from the guy.
Wow.
The guy runs after me, grabs me, and says, "All right, man." He's looking around, going, "All right, man. I don't want to go to hell." I said, "Yeah, that'd be stupid." And I turned around and walked away again. He
Wow.
chases me, grabs me by the arm, and says, "Hold on now. How do I get to heaven?" I led him to the Lord right there. He's a youth pastor now in Lexington, South Carolina. So, uh, 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 but see, what people hear these stories. Now, how do you get these stories? You have 40, 50, 60, 100, what people would call failures to the attempt of sharing the gospel to get the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 stories of the great successes. So to me, it's like fishing. I throw the line in the water. If the fish are biting and I don't get something, I'm throwing it right back in there, same spot. I'm going to try to drop it in the same hole that it was just in. I want to get that largemouth sitting over there. He's starving. He wants that grocery. So I'm throwing it in the same spot. If they're not biting, I'm throwing it somewhere else. That's the way I preach the gospel. That's why I share my faith. I do it like I'm fishing. If people are interested, some people are interested. Like I'll say, let me give you a little sample thing. I'm at the convenience store today getting gasoline. I hate to pay at the pump because then I can't talk to the people behind the counter. So I go in there and I say it to the lady behind the counter. She said, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm spoiled rotten." She said, "What do you mean by that?" I said, "Well, the Lord loves me. My wife loves me. My kids think I'm okay, barely. I'm spoilt. I'm ruined. I'm ruined." And I'm saying these words that, and then she looked at me and said, "Uh, well, that's good." And I'm thinking, okay, close it down. The fish aren't biting there. I did it at another gas station a couple months ago. The toothless wonder guy looks at me and says, "You're tore up, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, sir, boss man, I'm tore up." I said, "Jesus thinks I'm amazing." He forgave me of all my stupid sins, everything. He'll forgive you too. He said, I said, yes, he will. And I got to share Jesus with him. He prays to receive Christ through a bunch of tears. I'm just saying, it's just fishing. If they're biting, keep dropping it in there. If they're not biting, to me, the sharing the gospel thing is like building a bridge from you to the person, and they have to build the bridge from them to you. If at any point the bridge stops being built on any side, the gospel presentation's over. So the secret to sharing your faith with somebody is telling your story, making them want to hear it with a hook. So I use humor. I use worthless trivia. I was on a flight one time next to this guy who said he owns a company in Oregon that turns garbage into gasoline. I looked at him and said, "You're going to save the world," and I made him look awesome and feel awesome. And he's smiling. I said, "Draw up a hydrocarbon chain for him." He said, "You don't know what a hydrocarbon chain is." I said, "I do too. I was a pre-med student." He said, "All right," start drawing it up. And of course, I didn't know what anything he was doing there. And then we were laughing. I said, "It looks like Greek to me." Actually, I know more about Greek because I studied it. He takes out a magazine. He's a feature cover on U.S. News and World Report. He's the cover on it. The guy's a gazillionaire. He looks at me and says, "Well, what do you do?" Because I've been so interested in his stuff. Now he's starting to build a bridge to me. "What do you do?" "I'm an evangelist. I tell people about Jesus all over the world." I said, "Well, tell me more about that." The guy starts to weep at the end of about 30 minutes, and he prays to receive Christ and has been walking with God since. And so the bridge building thing is worthless trivia, humor. You, Fishing's the best. It's the best illustration ever to share Jesus with people. It's all over the Bible. How could you not preach the gospel without using fishing? So, uh, man, I love you, Chris Wells. Man, what
Man,
do I got to do when I
this
grow up
is
to be?
this is awesome. If people want to get in touch with Adrian Despres, if they're sitting here watching there today and they say, "Listen, we got to get that guy to our church. We got to get that guy to our event." And what's really cool about you is you preach to literally thousands of people, but I've seen you preach to 5 people before. I've seen you go and preach to little small groups, campgrounds. I've seen you go all over the place. How do they get in touch with Adrian Despres?
Forge is the name of my ministry, Forge, Forge. And our website is forgeforward.org, forgeforward.org. Or if you just Google mine, adriandepre.com, I have my own, it goes straight to forgeforward.org. I can't say it's my own website, but if you go to adriandepre.com, I would love to come speak at whatever event y'all have. Chris and I have been passing like 2 shifts in the night doing what do you call them, wild game banquets all over the country. That's been a lot of fun. I've been at a banquet. I was up in, I think, Pennsylvania, where Chris was a couple years ago or last year or sometime, and they went on and on and on about how much fun they had with you there. And boy, it's
Well, I
I
always tell
love
them,
it.
I always say, "Listen, you gotta get Adrian. You gotta get Adrian up here. You gotta get him." So you're going to be going pretty soon. You're going to be preaching at a place where they have like a big high fence deal. Tell us a
Yeah,
little about that coming up. So tell us
yeah, it's a
about the cold bucks you get a chance to.
yeah, it's a Quest Haven Lodge. Quest Haven Lodge is the name of the lodge. You can just Google that name. I don't know how to do that stuff. I'm a boomer. Just I still swipe. But Quest Haven Lodge, they have the high fence, the world record, the last 2 world records, 2 years in a row, were harvested on their property. They do a great job. It's still a very difficult hunt, not an easy hunt. 20,000 acres on one piece, 10,000 acres on another piece, and the whitetail are still whitetail, and they're finicky, but they got their big old racks. I'm going up there next week though to speak to a camp they do every year for they do teenage girls, teenage boys, younger girls, younger boys. They do 4 camps a year where they're really the whole family loves the Lord. They love Jesus. I tell you where I met him. This is going to sound a little bit strange. Don't judge me, but I was in Vegas preaching at a conference,
Yeah.
and if you can imagine it, it was a SCI, Safari Club International, and I went into this conference and I was passing out little brochures to get people to come to a dinner meeting with me, and so I walked up to this big old, what do you call the thing where they sell the camp whatever it's called, the big old thing they use for their ministry there. And there's a bunch of deer, and they had three crosses at the top of it. I said, "Hey man, what are those three crosses up there for? What does that stand for?" I said, "Oh no, we love Jesus." I said, "Jesus who? The Hispanic guy?" And I was just playing with them, and so these guys are all wrestlers in college. They got up in my grill. They got all the way around me. They're big old. Their ears are all torn up, and I'm going, "Oh dear, I might be in trouble here." And we were laughing at it. I said, "Jesus, I mean, how do you know that stuff's real?" And they were trying to lead me to Christ and doing all this stuff, and I just couldn't take it anymore. I started laughing. I said, "Sorry guys, I'm actually an evangelist. I'm here to invite you guys to come to a dinner, the banquet thing I'm speaking at," and they started laughing, they started pounding on me. Since then, we've been best friends, and it's been a lot of fun. Matter of fact, the first time their dad came, and they had like 6 boys that are all wrestler guys, and all their big, family, grandkids. They came to this dinner banquet thing. The first thing in my message was John 3:16, by the way, is the worst verse in the Bible. And these guys go, "Oh no, are they going to bring Kool-Aid out now?" And then I started doing that message, and this guy, the father, Russ Walk, the Walk family, Russ comes up to me afterwards, and he's just weeping. He says, "That's the greatest evangelistic message I've ever heard in my life." And he went on and on and on. To this day, he still looks back at that moment 10 years ago, and brags about how the Lord really touched him and told him to go deeper in his walk just from them. So that's where I'm going next week. I go there about once a summer, and donate some the barter. I barter for some bucks, bartering for bucks, preaching for bucks,
Yeah.
and we have a conference there. I do in the fall. It's called Bible and Bucks, or uh, mission and fishing. We do some fishing there too. I do mission and fishing in Alaska, but what I do is we go hunting there, and a bunch of guys who want to study the Bible together come, and a bunch of businessmen will come out there, and they'll harvest some bucks, and then we'll do Bible studies every day. We'll go through the Book of James or something like that, and I'll just chew on their ears and challenge us. See, us men, we need to be challenged, and so somebody needs to hit me in the head with a brick. That's what I need,
Yeah.
because I need to be challenged to love Jesus more. That's where I'm at right now.
Man, I appreciate you, buddy. I really do. I really do. Listen, folks, if you want to get in touch with Adrian, please, I'm gonna put a link up on the bottom of my podcast. And man, it's been awesome. I appreciate you coming on. And I love you, man. Listen, folks, this is the Bass Chaplain Fishing Podcast. You have a question about faith? You ever had need somebody to pray for you? You can go to the Bass Chaplain. Just type on Google. I'll be the first one that comes up. I'll be happy to talk with you day or night. My number's on the website. And we will catch you next week at high noon on Friday with the Bass Chaplain Fishing Podcast, where faith and fishing hook up. See ya.